Alex had spent 3 years loving Emily, believing her sharp tongue and constant criticism were just part of who she was. But over time, the insults became routine, the belittling normalized, and the feeling of walking on eggshells became his everyday reality. The breaking point came one evening when Emily smirked and said, "People would have to kill to have someone like me." The arrogance in her voice hit him harder than any argument they had ever had. In that instant, Alex realized he had slowly allowed himself to disappear in a relationship built on control and superiority. His silence had become permission, and his patience had become the very reason she thought she could treat him that way. For the first time in years, he saw the truth clearly. He wasn't losing Emily. He was finally choosing himself. Alex left the apartment without looking back, the door's final click echoing like a seal on a chapter he wished he had ended years earlier. Outside, the cool air felt foreign, almost too light for someone who had spent so long suffocating under someone else's dominance. He stood still for a moment, letting the reality settle in. It was over. He wasn't going to apologize, wasn't going to return to explain himself, and wasn't going to let Emily twist the narrative as she always did. That part of his life was done. The first thing he did when he reached his car was open the building app and request a lock change. He watched the confirmation message appear on his screen, a small but powerful symbol of reclaiming control. Next came blocking Emily's number, her email, and every platform where she could reach him. It felt strange, almost unreal, but not wrong. Never wrong. Once home, the silence of his living room felt heavier than expected. He sat on the edge of the couch and finally allowed himself to breathe without waiting for criticism to follow. But the quiet also reminded him of something else. The upcoming weekend. The party. The one Emily insisted they attend as a couple. The one where she would surely tell everyone her version of the breakup in the most dramatic and self-serving way possible. Alex already knew how she worked. Victimhood was her favorite costume. He didn't want to avoid the event. Avoidance would only feed her narrative. If he didn't show up, she would describe him as unable to face her, devastated, heartbroken, or worse, still obsessed. No, he wasn't going to let that happen. For once, he wouldn't let Emily control the story. He grabbed his phone and scrolled to a contact he trusted more than most people in his life. Olivia. A colleague, a friend, someone who had seen the dimming of his spark over the years without ever asking questions that might embarrass him. He hesitated only a second before messaging her, explaining the situation plainly and asking if she would go with him, not as a date, but as someone steady, calm, and impossible for Emily to manipulate around. Olivia replied within minutes, her message warm and simple. "Of course, you don't have to face her alone." Relief washed through him, not because he needed saving, but because he didn't have to stand in that room isolated while Emily performed her theatrics. He imagined walking into the party confidently, not hunched under her shadow, but beside someone who respected him. He imagined Emily's face when she realized her assumptions were wrong. She expected him to show up alone, insecure, maybe even desperate. She would expect to win. But Alex was done playing by her rules. He would show up, calm, steady, and unbothered, and for the first time, Emily would have no script to hide behind. This time, the story would not be hers to control. The moment Alex and Olivia stepped through the entrance of the venue, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations continued, laughter echoed, but something subtle rippled beneath the surface as people recognized him, without Emily. And with someone new beside him. Olivia offered a reassuring smile, her presence calm and grounding, while Alex straightened his posture as if reclaiming the space around him. He expected discomfort, but instead, he felt a strange sense of clarity. It didn't take long for Emily to notice. She was standing near the bar, surrounded by a small group of friends, animated in the way she always was when she wanted attention focused entirely on her. Her expression froze mid-sentence, the instant her eyes met Alex's. Shock. Confusion. A flicker of anger she didn't manage to hide. She excused herself from the group with a sweetness so forced it bordered on theatrical, then walked toward them with calculated poise. Alex, she said, dragging out his name like she was tasting bitterness. You brought someone. Her gaze scanned Olivia from head to toe, trying to classify her, rank her, reduce her, anything to gain control. Olivia simply nodded politely, unfazed. Yes, Alex replied, his tone even and unbothered. Olivia's a friend. Emily gave a tight smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. How cute, she said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. I guess some people move on, faster than they should. There it was, the jab wrapped in passive aggression. The kind of comment she had relied on for years to make Alex shrink. But he didn't shrink now. Not even an inch. Instead, he met her gaze directly. I moved on at the right time, he said calmly. And for the right reasons. Emily blinked, caught off guard by his steadiness. The people within earshot paused subtly, sensing a shift. She tried again. You know, Alex, you showing up here trying to act fine. It's obvious you're just trying to get a reaction from me. Alex almost laughed. It was the kind of projection she excelled at. He shook his head lightly. If I wanted a reaction, I'd repeat the things you used to say to me. His voice remained neutral, not cruel, not mocking, just honest. Like how people would kill to have someone like you. A few nearby guests turned their heads. Emily's cheeks darkened instantly. That was a joke, she snapped. You always take things too seriously. But her voice wavered. The confidence she wore like armor began to crack as she realized she wasn't in control of this interaction. Alex took a slow breath. I took it seriously because you meant it seriously. And because it was one of many things you said to make yourself feel big by making me feel small. The words were quiet, but their impact echoed around them more loudly than any dramatic fight could have. Emily opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. Her script, the one she always used, was useless here. Alex wasn't playing his old role anymore. He wasn't defensive, wasn't apologetic, wasn't afraid. In that moment, the room didn't turn against her. It simply stopped turning for her. And for the first time since he had known her, Emily was the one without control. Chloe, Emily's closest friend, approached Alex cautiously, her expression a mixture of concern and frustration. Alex, I don't understand why you're acting this way, she said, her voice low but firm. You can't just walk away and leave everything like this. She's upset. She deserves an explanation. Alex looked at her steadily, his calm demeanor unwavering. I've explained everything I need to, he replied quietly. And I'm not here to justify myself to anyone who hasn't seen the full picture. Chloe frowned, shifting uncomfortably. You can't just say that and expect people to understand, she insisted. Emily, standing a few feet away, watched intently, her lips pressed into a tight line. Alex took a deep breath, deciding it was time to speak clearly and calmly, without drama, without blame, simply the truth. I stayed in a relationship where I was constantly belittled, he began, looking Chloe directly in the eyes. I accepted insults, criticism, and manipulation as normal, because I thought that's what love was supposed to be. Chloe's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. I tolerated comments meant to make me feel small, jokes about my worth, passive-aggressive digs, and constant control disguised as care, Alex continued. I let it go because I loved Emily, because I thought I could handle it, because I thought it was my responsibility to fix her mood or accommodate her ego. He paused, letting the words sink in. Until one day, she said something that hit me differently. People would have to kill to have someone like me. That's when I realized I was in a relationship with someone who thrived on making others feel less than. Chloe opened her mouth, but Alex held up a hand, gently stopping her. This isn't about Emily being bad, he said, his voice calm, deliberate. It's about me, finally recognizing my worth. I decided I wouldn't allow myself to be treated that way anymore. He let the silence stretch, watching Chloe process his words. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer now, tinged with uncertainty. I didn't know it was that bad, she admitted. Alex nodded slightly, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to shame. I just wanted to be respected. That's all anyone deserves in a relationship. Chloe looked at Emily, who seemed suddenly smaller, her posture defensive, her confident facade slipping. Alex continued, addressing the truth everyone around could now sense. Emily's behavior, her words, her actions, weren't just hurtful to me. They controlled the narrative, isolated me, and tried to make everyone believe I was the problem. I am not. Chloe exhaled, realizing there was no counterargument. The evidence was in Alex's tone, his composure, the way he carried himself, unshakable. For the first time, Emily's closest friend saw the full scope of what had been hidden for so long. She could feel the weight of the truth pressing on her perception, impossible to ignore. Emily's carefully built story, the one she always relied on to manipulate and command attention, was unraveling in real time. Alex gave Chloe a small, calm nod, signaling the conversation was over. No anger, no gloating, just clarity. Chloe, quiet and reflective, finally understood. The narrative was no longer Emily's to control, and the person she thought she could manipulate had reclaimed his power. And in that moment, the reality of the situation began to ripple outward, unstoppable, undeniable, and entirely irreversible. Emily left the party fuming, her pride wounded more than she cared to admit. She couldn't stand the sight of Alex calm, composed, unbothered by her attempts to shame him. Her mind raced, formulating a plan to regain control and assert dominance. If she couldn't humiliate him publicly, she would attack him from every angle she could reach. Within hours, Emily began a covert campaign. She posted subtle jabs on social media, carefully worded to make it appear innocent, yet loaded enough to seed doubt among mutual friends. She messaged colleagues and acquaintances, painting Alex as unstable and petty, hinting at exaggerations and half-truths that could tarnish his reputation. She even called in favors, enlisting her mother and a few loyal friends to participate, all under the guise of defending her honor. When those measures seemed insufficient, Emily escalated further. She drafted anonymous complaints to Alex's HR department, alleging inappropriate behavior, harassment, and misconduct. The accusations were carefully crafted to appear serious, with just enough detail to spark investigation, but nothing that could be easily verified. She imagined Alex scrambling to defend himself, imagining the stress on him and the damage it could cause to his career. The thought made her pulse quicken with a sense of power she hadn't felt in months. But Alex had anticipated the possibility. He had collected records of communications, proof of her patterns of manipulation, and documentation of her false accusations. Every step Emily took, he was ready. He responded to HR promptly, providing evidence that demonstrated the allegations were baseless. The professionalism in his approach contrasted sharply with Emily's impulsive attacks, leaving the investigators with little doubt about the truth. HR reviewed the situation carefully. They concluded that Emily's actions were not only unfounded, but constituted harassment. Her repeated attempts to damage Alex's reputation and career were recorded, and formal warnings were placed in her file. For the first time, Emily's aggression backfired publicly. The power she thought she wielded so effortlessly slipped from her fingers. Meanwhile, Alex maintained his composure externally. He didn't confront Emily personally or lash out in retaliation. He allowed the facts and evidence to speak for themselves. Each of her attempts to provoke him only highlighted her instability and need for control. Friends and colleagues who had witnessed her actions began to notice the pattern, recognizing Alex's integrity and Emily's manipulative tendencies. Emily's frustration grew. Her messages went unanswered, her social media posts ignored, her attempts to isolate Alex failing. Every effort she made to assert influence ended up reinforcing the truth. Alex had moved on, and he was unshakable. Her network of support began to waver as people realized they had been complicit in her schemes, whether knowingly or unknowingly. By the time the dust settled, Emily was left with the realization that her attempts at retaliation had accomplished nothing. Instead, she had only exposed her own instability and malicious intent. Alex's calm, methodical, and strategic response not only protected him, but also turned the tables completely. The battle she had hoped to win ended with her reputation in jeopardy and her credibility severely undermined. Alex remained unscathed, proving that the most effective defense against toxicity was not revenge, but measured, unwavering clarity. The day Emily arrived at Alex's apartment, she carried an air of entitlement. Expecting confrontation, drama, and the satisfaction of asserting control. She believed that collecting her belongings would allow her to reclaim some sense of power over him. Alex, however, had already anticipated her visit. He met her at the door, calm, composed, and unflinching, a stark contrast to the storm she had been preparing. "Emily," he said quietly, "I've packed everything you left behind." Her eyes flicked to the neatly stacked boxes in the living room, then back to him, disbelief crossing her face. "You did what?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I packed your things and sent the furniture to storage," he replied evenly. "You'll have to arrange to pick them up from the warehouse if you want them." Emily's initial shock quickly morphed into fury. She started shouting, accusing him of overstepping, of being cruel, of trying to humiliate her. Her hands waved wildly, knocking over a small lamp, the sound of glass shattering echoing through the apartment. Alex remained unshaken. He didn't shout back. He didn't flinch. He simply observed, letting her anger exhaust itself against the reality he had created. When she lunged toward one of the boxes, trying to open it, Alex stepped forward calmly. "Emily, stop. This is the boundary," he said firmly. "You are welcome to take your things, but you will not destroy anything else in this apartment. This is my home now, and I decide what happens here." Her face contorted with rage, but his steady gaze prevented her from acting impulsively. Emily tore at the boxes, pulling items out and throwing them to the floor. She screamed, venting years of frustration and entitlement, expecting Alex to react with fear or apology. But he simply walked around her, placing the remaining boxes against the wall, ensuring nothing more could be damaged. Each box represented a fragment of the past she thought she could control, now firmly out of her grasp. Neighbors peered from windows at the commotion, and Emily's friends, who had come along for support, looked between her and Alex in uncertainty. He didn't need anyone's validation. His authority in this space was absolute, established by the calm, unwavering boundaries he had set. Emily's allies had no power here. Her theatrics were meaningless. Minutes passed, her yelling turning into exhausted breathing. Her attempts to intimidate him had failed completely. Alex gave her a final, clear statement. "This is the end of this chapter. You leave now, or I call security. I will not engage in any more conflicts with you." Emily, realizing that her old tactics no longer worked, stormed out, leaving chaos in her wake. When the door closed behind her, Alex exhaled, the tension in his body finally releasing. He walked through the apartment, surveying the minor damage, the displaced items, and the boxes waiting to be moved. None of it mattered. He had set the boundary, protected his space, and taken control of his life in a way Emily could never reverse. For the first time in years, he felt entirely in command of his own world. And Emily, despite all her efforts, had left empty-handed, powerless, and exposed. In the weeks following the apartment confrontation, the consequences of Emily's actions began to unfold. Her attempts to sabotage Alex's career had failed, and word of her harassment spread quietly but decisively among colleagues and professional contacts. People who had once admired her assertiveness now viewed her behavior as unstable and risky. Her credibility, meticulously built over years, began to erode with each story, each report, and each piece of evidence that contradicted her narrative. Emily's professional relationships suffered first. Clients became hesitant, wary of potential complications or legal issues stemming from her past behavior. Meetings that she once controlled effortlessly now ended with cautious discussions, contracts delayed, and decisions postponed. Her reputation for reliability was undermined by the very campaign she had launched to discredit Alex. Every attempt to manipulate others backfired, leaving her isolated in an environment where she had once thrived. Friends and acquaintances, who had previously acted as her support system, began to distance themselves. They had witnessed her campaigns, the social media posts, the harassment reports, and the aggressive confrontations. While some had initially sided with her out of loyalty, the growing evidence of her manipulation and vindictive actions made continued support uncomfortable. Emily found herself increasingly alone, her network shrinking day by day, leaving her to face the consequences of her choices without the buffers she had relied on for so long. Her social presence, carefully curated for years, began to crumble. Posts intended to frame Alex as the villain were scrutinized and often met with skepticism or disbelief. Former followers and friends questioned her motives, noticing inconsistencies in her stories. The influence she had once wielded online diminished rapidly, replaced by whispers of concern and criticism. The public facade she relied upon to maintain control and admiration was replaced with doubt, judgment, and suspicion. Professionally and socially, Emily's life unraveled simultaneously. Contracts were canceled, partnerships reconsidered, and opportunities she had taken for granted vanished. Her attempts to assert dominance over Alex had created ripples that extended far beyond their personal conflict. The very behavior she used to manipulate and intimidate had become the reason others no longer trusted her. Her career prospects diminished, her social circle fractured, and her influence evaporated, leaving her with a stark reality to face. Alex, on the other hand, maintained his composure throughout the fallout. He continued his work, unbothered by her attempts at disruption. Colleagues and friends admired his professionalism, his restraint, and his ability to rise above the chaos. His life moved forward steadily, each day reinforcing the contrast between his stability and Emily's collapse. Ultimately, Emily was left to face the total consequences of her choices. She lost her career momentum, her social standing, and her closest allies. The actions she had believed would empower her had only accelerated her downfall. Alex had never retaliated with anger or revenge. He had simply stood firm, set boundaries, and allowed the natural consequences of her behavior to take their course. In the end, it was Emily's own actions, not Alex's, that led to her complete undoing. Alex woke up one morning, feeling lighter than he had in years. The tension, the fear, the constant need to anticipate Emily's reactions were gone. He no longer carried the weight of someone else's control over his life. Life with Olivia was calm, balanced, and filled with mutual respect. They laughed, shared ideas, and supported each other without the shadows of manipulation. Alex realized that happiness wasn't about proving a point or seeking revenge. It was about living fully, freely, and without compromise to one's own values. News of Emily's downfall reached him occasionally, but he felt no satisfaction in it. He understood that her collapse was the natural consequence of her choices, not his actions. The peace he had found was far more powerful than any fleeting victory of retaliation. For the first time, Alex truly understood the meaning of letting go. The most effective form of revenge had never been to hurt her. It had been to remove himself entirely, to reclaim his life and boundaries. Emily's own actions led to her undoing, while he moved forward with clarity, dignity, and lasting peace.